hear me?
Well, good morning to those of you who are joining us from the United States today. Good afternoon to those of you in Europe, and good evening to everyone in Asia and other regions. So welcome today to the Conference Board webcast, and I'm delighted to be sharing with you this webcast with NatWest Group and Fiona McCaslin. And Fiona will be sharing with us today their experiences in building an enterprise-wide, mature, and very well embedded wellbeing strategy, which they started working on in 2014. So really looking forward to hearing about how they've done this over the last 6 years, and very much hoping that this, what you hear about today will help you in your own journey as an organisation in establishing or embedding a wellbeing strategy. So I'm Marion Devine, I'm Senior Researcher in Human Capital at the Conference Board, and I will be your moderator for today's webcast. So just before we begin, I'll just run it through some information about today's platform. So please do ask questions as they occur to you via our chat box at the bottom left of your screen. And it really does make a difference to these webcasts, to have input from you, to know what you're thinking, to be able to flow some of those questions to our speakers. So please do that. And if we can't follow up on some of them, we will come back to you via email. You can move to the full screen at any time by clicking the 4 arrows at the top right of your screen. We won't have a set of slides today, but as I said, Fiona will have a very flexible, dynamic discussion if this is what you prefer, so please ask those questions. And that you will be awarded continuing education credits for this viewcast. So you just need to be logged on, and during the time you'll be asked to click on the link, and you need to stay on for the duration of the webcast. And as always, we do have a really brief evaluation form. We do look at these, we do value hearing what you think, and especially any ideas about how to improve or future programs, topics for future programs. Please share this program with your colleagues. It will be available on demand after the webcast on our Conference Board website. So now that we've done that, it's with great pleasure that I would like to introduce our speaker today. Fiona, I'd like to welcome you. So Fiona McCaslin is the Wellbeing Lead at NatWest Bank Group, and her role is to champion the mental health and wellbeing policies that have been pioneered by the bank. The bank has about 64,000 employees. It's one of the biggest UK banks, and the brands include NatWest, RBS, Ulster Bank, Coutts. And I think that one of the things that is very striking about the bank is that having a healthy culture, has always been one of their core priorities. So welcome, Fiona.
Thank you, Marion. Delighted to be here today, and hi to everyone on the call.
Great. So I think starting the programme, I thought if we just start in the very immediate here and now, which is sort of very much in the context of all the challenges and stresses of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. And then we're going to cover what the wellbeing strategy is at NatWest, and then come back into what are some of the current challenges and the learning and the insight that you've had, Fiona, about embedding your wellbeing strategy and making it a very mature part of your company's culture. So I think we all know that very much that mental health has really come up the agenda for all of us, probably personally in our families and certainly in our workplaces when we've experienced lockdown. There's so many uncertainties still continue to unfold, job insecurities, health insecurities. It's a very, very challenging time. And I think something that I'm well aware of as a researcher is that when you look at hugely disruptive, difficult economic times like the global crisis of 2008, there is a real consequence in terms of mental health. And there are some very impressive sort of big studies that show that, actually the impact of those very stressful times play out, and they can play out for years. And the main message of the data is that health and well-being of employees and future employees can be affected and will be affected by this pandemic for quite some years to come. So it's really essential for large employers to ramp up their wellbeing programs, I think, in anticipation of the challenges. So Fiona, can you just tell us what has it been like for you as wellbeing lead in these last few months? Because that must have been a tremendously challenging time for you.
And challenging, Marie, is probably the right word, actually. Yeah, I mean, just complex, fast-paced. Just really, as you would expect, we've not really seen anything like it. If I think back to February, March time, which does seem a bit of a world away now, we had just launched a new strategy in the bank. So Alison Rose, our CEO, had just launched a new strategy around being a purpose-led bank, which is really meaning that we champion people, families, communities, colleagues, to really help people thrive and be the best that they can. So as an organisation, that was a really key part for us back in February. And then, of course, the pandemic hit, and I guess at that point we had a decision to make as an organisation about actually, gosh, do we embrace this new strategy that we've got, or actually do we go back to what we know is tried and tested in terms of what the NatWest strategy is, and we took the former. So we absolutely embraced the new strategy, and what that meant was that we were playing out day by day what being a purpose-led bank actually meant, and it meant supporting all of our customers. As you rightly said, wellbeing went from being a very integral part of our strategy to something that was the utmost and foremost, most important thing at the bank at the time. So for me personally, it meant a very lot of long hours, and my well-being was certainly being tested at the time. But actually, it, from a professionalism point of view, immensely proud of where we've come and the approach that we took at that time.
And in terms of with COVID-19, how did you stay in tune with, how did you take the pulse in terms of the stresses and strains on people and continuing to be?
Yeah, so we've done that throughout, actually. So I guess when we started off, we took a very evidence-based approach to the pandemic. And what I mean by that is we relied very heavily on external data. And I know we've got people joining us today from all parts of the globe. And as a group, we have representation in all those sort of main regional hubs. And of course, what was very interesting and at that time was that everyone was in a different situation. So having a wellbeing program that's a one-size-fits-all doesn't work in a pandemic, actually. And that's the approach we've always taken before. We've always been quite strong in having one bank-wide plan so everyone feels the same and experiences the same. But in a pandemic, everyone's situation is unique, right down to the individual in terms of what they were juggling, etc. So that external data was really important to keep a sort of sense check on where things were. We relied a lot on internal data and colleague sentiment as well. So we have run two what we call pulse surveys now, very much focused on well-being, around how people are feeling, what sort of things are affecting their mental health. And to give you a bit of insight, so we had 45% of colleagues telling us in that first pulse survey back in May that their mental health was absolutely affected by the pandemic. And from a UK perspective, that ties in with the Office of National Statistics, where it's sitting at 50%, so we're just slightly under that. So 1 in 2 people are telling us that it's massively affecting them. And what those pulse surveys allowed us to do was then to tailor the support for wellbeing as we move through it, and we'll continue to do that. And then the third element of our approach was that sort of professional judgment and the appetite of the organisation. So our leaders have never experienced anything like this before, and it was absolutely vital that we fully supported them and brought them along and got their feedback throughout the process as well. So we're very, very linked in from a wellbeing perspective to our leaders, both in terms of providing support but getting that feedback as well.
Yeah, I think I think some of the feedback we've got from our members over these last few months is it's actually quite easy, I think, to overlook your leaders. They are the linchpin when it comes to taking care of people in this very changing times, and I think that there is that pressure for them to feel that they have the solutions, that they can cope with all of this. So I think that's great to hear. Did you find and I guess you're doing a partial return to the workplace, or anyway things are in flux, what would you say were sort of the 2 or 3 really key challenges for well-being in this very uncertain environment?
Yeah, I think it's that first point around that everybody's situation is different. So actually having one well-being intervention that perhaps, so for example, we introduced within a couple of weeks we were able to offer everybody access to a virtual GP, because that was a key thing at that time. But actually, as things have developed, we can't have anything in isolation. So from a wellbeing perspective, it's really important to have it support across all 4. Well, we've got 4 pillars of wellbeing. So financial wellbeing, social well-being, which is that sort of team and staying connected, community angle, mental health and physical health as well. And what's really interesting, I think, as this pandemic goes on, is the peaks and troughs that we're seeing along the way, and kind of staying connected with people to understand what those peaks are at certain times. So certainly that kind of unique, that everyone's in that unique position, was one of the challenges. I think the other challenge is the communication side. So, when you've got a company that's got 66,000 people, you've got frontline staff in particular who are, working their socks off every single day, not having the chance to even take a breath and think about their own personal well-being because they're so focused on doing the right thing for the customer. How do you support these people? And for us, we really have to push every single one of our communication channels to make sure that people have the right support at the right time, and that's been challenging.
Okay, well, I think this is probably a good time then for our viewers, for you to just give us an overview of what is your wellbeing program. And there are already 2 questions. There seems to be interest as well in terms of how you target specific communities, whether they're women or people from a minority group or specific geographies. So I think that, this thing of well-being is a really important thing, but for each person, it's also a different experience. So if you give us that overview and tell us a little bit about how you have tailored, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So to your point, Marion, we started really our wellbeing strategy. We've always had wellbeing in bank, but we kind of take a different approach back in 2014. And as I mentioned, we have the four pillars, which actually have kind of stood the test of time for us. That sort of physical, mental, social, and financial element. I think arguably there's a 5th one around career wellbeing, and we're kind of toying with that at the moment. But certainly the 4 pillars. And I guess in terms of our approach to the programme, we've kind of tried and tested it now. So we have, I guess let me start with the programme itself. So we have a 12-month calendar, which every month we do a different focus on a wellbeing topic, and it would be across all four of those pillars. We make very direct links into national and global campaigns. So for those in the UK, the Time to Change campaign from a mental health perspective, signing up to the Mental Health at Work commitment, all of which really, really help provide a very strong foundation to any wellbeing programme. And then globally, things like World Mental Health Day, Mental Health Awareness Week in May, etc. So we're very, very linked in from that perspective. I guess at the core of our wellbeing strategy is actually what is it we're trying to achieve. And Mercer's had this fantastic, I guess, slide or model, which they talk about the wellness barrier. So actually, I'm sure if you Google wellness barrier and Mercer's, you'll be able to see it. But it talks about the fact that a lot of our wellbeing and health support in organisations and costs are focused on the long-term disabled or those who are currently ill. But actually what they found was your long-term disabled probably make up about 5% of the organisation. The ill make up about 25%. So that's kind of on the right-hand side. And then on the other side, with the forgotten side, is those that are truly well, health and fit and doing great, around about 15%, which leaves you with an at-risk population of about 55%. And actually what your wellbeing strategy, what we found is we needed to shift that focus away from the ill and the long-term disabled. Shift the focus away is probably the wrong thing to say, but equally focus on the importance of those who are at risk. And that's really what's at the root of the wellbeing strategy is how do we really help reduce that 50%, 55% of people that we've got. So we have this 12-month program. Oh, sorry, Maya.
No, I was just. How did you define this 50%? Was that through surveys? I mean, can you just explain that a little bit? So they weren't completely well, but not unwell.
Yeah. So it's Mercer's actually who have done the study into it, but it's people who have got high blood pressure, for example, underlying health conditions, people who are potentially overweight and therefore at risk of moving from that at-risk category into the ill and the long-term disabled category. So it's that precursor population that, and I think quite interesting from a COVID perspective, and where we're starting to look at 2021 is actually how do we really tap into some of those things that we know that COVID is beginning to highlight as real at-risk population. So whether it's a certain population, whether it's BAME colleagues, men, people over a certain age, how do we actually start to tailor our wellbeing support and our strategy so that it's more tailored to those populations? And that's really what we're trying to get to there. So we have that 12-month program. What we do on top of that is we run campaigns throughout the year, and this is maybe to the question that came in around that sort of tailored support, and it varies from year to year. And of course, this year our campaigns we kind of threw up in the air back in March because it became a COVID campaign and still remains that way. But what that allows us to do is a real deep dive into some of those probably at risk elements that form part of the wellbeing strategy. And to give you an example from what we've done over the last sort of 6 months is we've run campaigns around stress in particular, around anxiety, and then we then tailored the campaigns to quite specific populations. So, for example, where we've got over 55,000 colleagues now working from home, and many of whom are juggling lives with families and caring responsibilities. So we've run a campaign specifically around how do we best support people who are in that situation. We've just come out of a campaign on men's health and women's health, which has been extremely well received actually, because we've gone down the route from a women's health to say, actually, what did it feel like to be going through the menopause, for example, whilst dealing with a pandemic? And to say we were overwhelmed by the response is probably an understatement, because nobody kind of tackles those groups or what people are dealing with, and that there is definitely something about kind of staying connected with that population. And as we move into World Mental Health Day, we've taken the decision to run a campaign specifically for BAME colleagues, because Wellbeing colleagues are exceptionally worried at the moment because of the pandemic. We equally know from feedback and talking to our colleagues around, actually there is a stigma attached with reaching out sometimes and getting wellbeing support. So how do we bring that to life for people? How do we share personal stories? How do we make it as easy as possible for people to access that wellbeing support? So our overall strategy is kind of the standard things that we do on a month-to-month basis, but very targeted campaigns depending on what we're seeing from a colleague sentiment or what's going on in the external environment as well.
And do you actually, in terms of when it's targeted, I mean, how do you just sort of push it out there and the respective people take it on board, or is it more targeted? Because of course there's self-disclosure and some of this stuff is sensitive personal data. How does that work?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we at this point we've tended to put it out to everybody, because actually no matter, I guess the approach we take in NatWest is, even though we're targeting people who are working for the organisation, wellbeing is not just about you as an individual within the bank. Actually, it's you and your family and your friends and colleagues and much wider. So we don't take that kind of insular approach. So the reason that we send it to everybody is because we want you to take that wellbeing support and use it in your life as you need to, so whether that's in work or outside work as well. So the structure we have in place, that might just be helpful to share a little bit around that, is we have what's called a Wellbeing Implementation Committee, which I think we need to change the name of. It's not the great way, but anyway, it's a group of people, around about 30 representatives, fairly senior people across the organisation who represent all areas of business. So it's a format whereby we can share what we're doing from a bank-wide perspective, but it also allows a channel for us to get feedback and insights into each of our different regions as well, and business area groups. So they meet on a monthly basis.
Are they do they volunteer, or are they chosen, or are they elected by their part of the business?
It's a bit of a mixture actually, and it's evolved over time. So when we first set it up, kind of back 2014, 2015, it tended to be people who are passionate about the wellbeing agenda. So a real mix of people, I would say, at that point. Over time, it's kind of matured as wellbeing has moved up the sort of corporate interest and strategy into being elected and nominated by businesses. And what we found is that over time they've appointed more senior people into that role. So because you really want people in there who are responsible and can make decisions on behalf of their business. What didn't work so well is when people then had to go away and check with someone and come back. So we want to be, quite fast-paced and making quick decisions. So that's working really well, particularly obviously throughout the pandemic. But the other element we've now added is, well, we always had it in plan to have a real good champion network across the bank. And at the start of the pandemic, we kind of ummed and hawed around whether we should do that now, or whether from an absorbability perspective it was too much for the business to take on. And we decided that we would accelerate the launch of our champion programme. So it had been in plan for later this year, but we launched it literally within a week or so back in May. And we have over 1,000 wellbeing champions who have been absolutely critical in that. You talked about the communication approach, just making it really easy for us to get information and support out to people on the ground, and we're absolutely delighted with how that's working out actually. So I think having that, call it the army of people, very, very eager at the moment, because of course everybody's talking about wellbeing, and they want to make a difference, they want to help, and they come up with some fantastic ideas, and they share stories and they share resources. So it just makes it a lot easier as well.
Yeah, and does that lead to a kind of different perception that this is not necessarily HR-led thing, or you know, there's more pull from the business? I mean, is it important in that way?
Yeah, I think it has. So it's definitely, you know, it started off. I mean, let's be honest. I think Wellbeing started off a few years ago. It's always that kind of fluffy, light thing that people refer to, and it's not that anymore. And actually, interestingly, we've had some feedback recently that people want to move away from the word well-being because it has that certain connotation, and they want to put a bit more sort of stronger language behind it, just to show how important it is. So that's something we're going to have a look at actually. But definitely, you know, it's certainly you know, as integrated as it can be in our corporate strategy in terms of well-being, and tone from the top has been key. So Alison Rose, as our CEO, has you know, continues to talk about the importance of well-being and looking out for ourselves and each other. We set out a series of commitments, and you know, and it's just, you know, it's made the world of difference.
And I think you told me that your executive sponsor, you have an executive sponsor, and this is your chief risk officer for NatWest Markets. I think that's what you said. So again, kind of, you've got this wellbeing committee, you have top championing, and then you've got this executive sponsor. But what is that role, and why the chief risk officer? Does that mean that wellbeing is seen as a sort of an aspect of risk management?
No, actually, so it's nothing to do with our job title. So what happened was our executive team, our board, were sitting around the table one day, and as I understand it, they kind of pushed their papers to the side one day, and they had an impromptu half an hour or 45-minute discussion on the importance of mental health within the group, which, you know, was unheard of 10, 15 years ago, and we were delighted to hear that actually. And as a result of that, our executive sponsor said, well, actually, she shared a personal story at that time, of which she has since shared with her our wider colleagues, just in terms of some personal physical health that she's been dealing with. And because of that, she then offered to take up the role as exec sponsor. And we've had a number of exec sponsors over the year, and I think there's definitely something about, well, they make a massive difference because it shows how important it is to the organisation. The role they take is one where they can endorse things that we're doing from a wellbeing perspective, but when they can actually add on to that and talk about their personal stories and really kind of share some of that, the impact it has is incredible. And I always refer back to when people say, what's the one thing that's made the biggest difference in NatWest in terms of well-being? And it is that personal story. It's people, you know, let's face it, being brave enough to talk about whether it's mental health or physical health issues. But when you have it from an exec sponsor, it's even more powerful.
And actually, Fiona, that's leading to sort of my next question. So you've put in this infrastructure, you've put in a certain sort of governance structure, and I know that there's a wellbeing team as well, and you're a wellbeing lead. What would you say? I mean, some companies through COVID have been putting in all sorts of great programs, you know, yoga and fitness classes, and they might sort of say, yes, we have a wellbeing sort of strategy. But what's the difference between that and something that really is embedded, something that has come to maturity? How would you describe that?
Yeah, I think it's when you stop seeing well-being as an add-on to what you do on a day-to-day basis. So to give you an example, we have as part of our performance management process, performance and action goals, which are, you know, objectives that people set on a quarterly basis and obviously measured against, etc. Now, there's no point as an organisation us talking about the importance of well-being and things that people should be doing without really integrating these into our day-to-day working lives. So actually, we're looking at how do we bring some of the great well-being things that people are doing just now, the focus that they have, and truly embedding it into our performance management system. how do we take our performance management coaches, of which we have, and make sure that they're all upskilled to be able to talk confidently and equipped to talk about well-being when they're speaking to our leaders on a day-to-day basis. How do we make sure that in our recruitment process it's truly embedded, that people understand where we sit from a well-being perspective and the support and resources that are available. So I think that's where the difference comes, is when it stops looking at isolation and you do start to look at it as an integral part of every part of the colleague journey.
Did you ever feel that you had to work very hard to actually establish the business case? Some companies will sort of say, you need to be really clear about the business case to really get that, to gain momentum, the ROI, and any sort of program that you do. I mean, was that the case in the early phase, and is it still the case, or does it have its own credibility and buy-in?
Well, there's nothing like a pandemic to put it to the top to do your business case for you. So I think in terms of where we are now, let's move it on to the good thing that's come out of it. I think to your question of kind of 4 or 5 years ago, if I'm really honest, the board never ever asked for a business case on wellbeing, so everybody recognises it was a good thing to do. What it just needed was that kind of structure and resource. And you talk about a wellbeing team. We're actually only a wellbeing team of about 2.5 people, so it doesn't take a lot of resource or money actually to build a really good wellbeing plan, which is always quite positive when you're talking to the board around it, because there's so much out there already, and actually we work really, really closely with some of our suppliers, our benefit suppliers. When you actually talk to them, they have a plethora of resources that they can offer. An employee assistance program, which was we really started at the beginning around building the EAP out and moving it away from being just a crisis line. It's incredible what they can actually do, and they offer one-to-one coaching with managers. They run training sessions for us constantly, all of which is included in our contract. So I think I think if I'm honest, we've never really been asked for an ROI or clarifying what the ROI is. I suspect now, as part of the pandemic, we are very, very closely monitoring the sentiment of colleagues, take up of some of the wellbeing resources, and just understanding where we need to navigate to next. And the board are exceptionally bought into that and interested to know where we can take it from here.
And of course, that's a great sort of question in itself, is how do you measure your impact? How do you measure your progress? And, is it through kind of mainly hard data, or is it also soft, more dialogue? How do you do that?
Yeah, it's a mixture of both. You're absolutely right. So the easy part is, so we've just rolled out an emotional wellbeing program to colleagues. So it's very, very easy for us to monitor exactly how many colleagues have accessed the program and are using it, what programs that they're using. So the one that we have has different elements, as a sleep program, mindfulness, stress, resilience. So we can very, very quickly see, for example, stress, anxiety and resilience programs have shot through the roof, and sleep actually, whereas things like the money worries program less so. So there's definitely that hard data, and EAP is a really good example of that, where we get a monthly report. We do a quarterly strategic review with our EAP providers, so they can help us kind of understand, really get the insights from it. So really pushing our suppliers to say, don't just tell us what the figures are, but help us understand what that means in practice, and that's been hugely insightful. The other part in that hard data is the importance of joining it all up together, and we're by no means got there yet, and I think it's one of the things I would love for us to get better at in 2021. But how do we bring our EAP data our resilience and mental health programs data together, to our private medical cover, claims data, all of these things, and start to build the story of what your well-being looks like. And that's certainly going to be a focus for us going forward. But you're right, there's then the kind of anecdotal, softer side data. And it's just asking the question, actually, we use, we're very lucky, we have what's called, we call it Workplace, but effectively it's Facebook at Work, sort of closed group within the organisation. And we have a wellbeing group on there which has about 28,000 members. So very, very quickly we can go out and ask really simple questions. So I've gone out this week and said, you know what, we're actually looking at 2021 strategy. Tell us what works, tell us where our gaps are, what do you want to see? And immediately you start to just get real live data. And it doesn't need to be a Facebook at Work, it can be any communication channels that an organisation has. So we test everything at every time we have an interaction with them, so that really helps to shape what we do going forward.
And I think you have a wellbeing index as well. How important is that? How useful is that?
Yeah, it's hugely. So our wellbeing index sits as part of our employee opinion survey called Our View. So we have a suite of questions that we ask in there. Anything, and we've changed it actually this year. We've added to it, I should say. So everything from questions we tend to ask are things about how interested is the senior managers, how interested are senior management in my well-being? Because that really gives a great indication of how does it feel for the individual, in terms of the leaders. Because if you talk to leaders, they'll say, "Yeah, I'm interested in well-being," and we do. But actually, if you hear it from the horse's mouth, then it's great. We ask a question around flexible working, that kind of social well-being element, and how supported people feel and whether it makes a difference. We ask a question now on energy levels. So this is a new one. So one of the, I guess, interesting where we are in terms of COVID is that where people were at March, April time, energy levels were, I think for all of us, running on adrenaline through the roof. There's been a huge dip in energy, so people are struggling on a day-to-day basis to keep motivated, keep those energy levels up. So that's a way for us to monitor it as well. And then we've added in some questions around financial well-being. So how is COVID affecting your financial health, and link that to mental health as well. So it's a really, and because we ask those questions year on year, and we benchmark to industry peers and other performing companies, then it gives us a really good indication of where we sit in that perspective.
Thank you. So I think as well, so you sort of said that earlier about stigma, and we're talking about how do you embed it, and you ask these questions. Have you managed to sort of get self-disclosure very much part, openness, self-disclosure, part of that cultural backlog, and that presumably requires quite a bit of trust. How do you get to that point?
Yeah, and as I say, it has made such a difference in terms of removing that. I think about mental health stigma and where we were 4 or 5 years ago as an organisation. And I'm not saying we've removed the stigma, because I don't know if you ever can, but we've come leaps and bounds since then to the point where people will openly talk about their mental health issues on a par with physical health, which it is incredible, really. And the bit that has made the biggest difference is that personal story element. So the key is setting up probably two things: setting up a psychologically safe environment for people to be able to share their stories and feel that it will be accepted. And that communication channel that I talked about, Facebook, has been key in that, because it's a safe environment. People know there's nothing's going to happen if they say something on it. And actually all that happens is you get loads and loads of support coming on the back of it as well. And And then the other element is, using your key people in the organisation to start the ball rolling. So when we started off our mental health programme of removing stigma, we selected people, senior people, and people from certain backgrounds and challenges to really bring that to life for us. So I think communication is the key thing, and making sure it feels safe for people, whatever that channel will be, and for leaders to be role modelling it.
And I get the impression from sort of having spoken with you that another marker perhaps of maturity in a wellbeing strategy is it's not just leader or manager or line manager led, that there's also something about peer-to-peer care that goes on. Is that something that resonates with you?
100%. And actually, it's never been more apparent as probably the last few months for us. We were overwhelmed at the beginning around the support that people had for each other, wanting to support each other. And again, probably a good example would be, we had a wellbeing engagement calendar that we set up at the outset of the pandemic, where we had colleagues who just wanted to share their skills and support and experiences. So we had everything running from Despercise to Zoom classes to lots of different things, through to people actually wanting, from a social wellbeing, wanting to read bedtime stories over the communication channels so that parents could have a break. So just lovely things that just made such a difference. And I think the response that we've had to the Wellbeing Champions, which is very much a peer-to-peer support mechanism that we've got there, is testament to that. We did decide to move away from, there's a big question around, do we have mental health champions or do we do something different? And the issue that we had with mental health champions on their own in terms of peer-to-peer support is that mental health is so intrinsically linked to physical health and social well-being and financial well-being that actually just to train people up on just mental health didn't feel right. It just didn't feel the right thing to do. So that's why the approach we've taken in terms of that peer-to-peer support is to be holistic and to share, make sure we equip our champions across all four of those pillars so they can support each other.
And what about the sort of link with inclusion? I mean, an inclusive workplace, it's been never more important in the light of some of the really difficult events that have been going on around the world. And we're also in a situation where people are working, virtually and digital. The digital transformation of organisation has really speeded up. So how does wellbeing slot into your whole work around inclusion and inclusive workplaces? Yeah,
so we actually brought together our wellbeing and inclusion teams about a year ago. So we actually sit virtually alongside each other at the moment. And what that's enabled us to do is to really work hand in hand when it comes to, especially during the pandemic as a good example, where we know that there are particular groups of people who, for whichever reason, are more affected than others. So it's been never more important, to your point, that we do that. There are some things that we still, keep quite separate, but it does make the programme far more inclusive for people when you can put those different lenses on it. And I think, as I said, in the run-up to World Mental Health Day, we are going to do a focused campaign for our BAME colleagues, where, to use some of the examples before, we are going to be looking at personal stories and really showcasing the support and resources, and we very much do that hand in hand with inclusion.
And what does well-being and inclusiveness mean in terms of your digital future as a bank? And I know that's something that many organisations are asking themselves, and I know that you may not have that fully formed vision. But where are you in your thinking on that?
Yeah, so we're right in the middle of the thinking is probably the right answer to that. So the approach that we have taken is we have what's called a ways of working work stream that's ongoing at the moment, which is really around understanding how our colleagues have been affected by the pandemic, and therefore what are the longer term implications of that. So we have grouped the approach we've taken is we've grouped our colleagues into different segments. We've taken a segmentation approach. So, for example, a couple of them are we've got a knowledge worker group, we've got an operational work group, we've got a front-facing group, and then do a real deep dive with our business colleagues into each of those areas. And similar to the approach that we take from a personal banking customer approach, where you start to build out personas and understand actually what does it mean to work in each of those areas, that's the approach we've taken. So under each of those segmentation groups, we're building out different personas of what it looks like to be in that group in this new way of working. And the initial feedback is suggesting that people generally are liking the working from home, but they probably will want some office interaction at some point. So, and it's likely to be, we'll come back together from a sort of team collaboration perspective, or it might be sort of one-to-one well-being issue. There's all sorts of reasons you'd come back together, but actually the sitting kind of 9 to 5 in an office, actually the initial feedback might be that we do something slightly different. So we're right in the middle of all of that at the moment, and working through what that would look like for the organisation going forward. And what that allows me to do from a wellbeing perspective is take each of their personas and put a wellbeing lens on it. And that's the piece of work that I'm just about to kick off now. So that tailored approach is far more tailored than it ever has been before, and is absolutely relevant to those people.
Could you give one example of how that would sort of play out? Because I suspect a lot of our viewers would be really interested in that.
Yeah, so it's early days. Yeah, we've not quite got all the way to the end yet. But to give you an example, so I think about the knowledge worker. So I'm in that kind of knowledge working environment. I sit. I'm kind of working permanently at home at the moment. So from a wellbeing perspective, the key things that will be important to me are things like flexible working. So what does my previous pattern of I start an early bird, so 7 till 2:30. Actually, is that still right for me? And how do we give people the remit to actually think about what the structure looks like for them going forward? Another example would be that staying connected piece. So working from home, I'm very, very connected with my immediate team through Zoom and Teams and lots of different channels. But actually, is that going to be the right way from a well-being perspective? That social well-being element as well. So how do I make sure that when we're looking at the well-being programme going forward, that we build in some of best practice or programmes, whatever it might be, to help people adjust to the new way of working. So it's early days for us in that space, but it does mean that each of the groups will have a very different and tailored well-being support going forward, I suspect, albeit there'll be crossover in some areas.
Yes, thank you. That's really interesting. So the phase that you're at now is that I know that you have been working on a cultural transformation. You've sort of branded yourself as NatWest Group, and your new CEO, Alison Rose, has very much talked about that the next phase for you is building and nurturing a purpose-led organisation. How does wellbeing fold into that? I know you started telling us a little bit at the beginning, but how do you see wellbeing evolving now?
Yeah, I mean you're right. It lends itself to the wellbeing agenda. Is the honest answer. So the purpose-led is all about, as I said at the beginning, just the championing of people, communities, businesses, so that they can thrive in every single thing that they do. So what that from my perspective, what that allows me to do is to really focus on our colleague well-being, because that's the remit to do it. So we want people to be able to thrive at work. We want them to bring the best of themselves to work. But it's also meant that actually we've taken some time out over the last year to say what are the elements of our programme that will help to activate purpose. So we've got a particular work stream that's working on that at the moment. So to give you some examples, this year from a wellbeing perspective, we had so mental health awareness training for all line managers as mandatory, very much part of that. So and we accelerated that delivery because of the pandemic actually. But how important it is that our colleagues, our line managers, can support each other and support their teams from a mental health perspective, so that our colleagues are in a better place, so that they can then help customers and businesses to be the best they can. So there's that definite link between well-being and what we're trying to do, you know, what our strategy is from an organisation. A couple of the other things that we had, the champions was part of that. So actually having a champion network who can activate that well-being and link straight to purpose as well. And we've just introduced a third element, which is around resilience. So again, pre-pandemic was on our radar to have a resilience programme for all of our colleagues, and again we've brought it forward. But so important that people can have a toolkit that we can dip into to help them, you know, be the best that we can. And it's not all about everybody being the same, because not everybody is, and everyone will have different challenges going on. But all of these things brought together then help us to be a purpose-led bank.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. So I would like to remind everyone out there, if you do have some specific questions and you'd like to know more detail of what Fiona is saying, please do put in those questions. So I think for me, I think we're coming to now sort of distilling some of the learning and the insights that you have gathered over the years. If you're a company that has sort of pockets of good practice and you really want to start, you know, joining that together in some sort of wellbeing strategy, so very much at the sort of beginning of that journey, what would you say were some of the really key things that would help them to really get started and to get some momentum?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got probably a number of learnings along the way. So I'm going to slightly contradict myself here, but the one thing is to start off with a one plan for everyone, albeit you will over time want to tailor that. But I think to go in tailored first of all is probably just too big a stretch. So actually just having one plan that's quite simple, and to use, you know, your suppliers and some of the external national events that are happening doesn't take a lot of resource and doesn't take a lot of money. So, you know, that can easily be done, and it just shows a real commitment. I think some of the other learnings are the impact of senior leaders on engagement is crucial. So whether it's an exec sponsor or whether actually you just have some leaders in your organisation who are willing to share their personal story and get behind some of the things you're doing, massive impact on colleagues. The other part is learnings would be to look at your suppliers. So I guess many organisations will have access to, for example, employee assistance programme. A real key learning for us, like I mentioned earlier, was don't just assume it's a tick in the box. Don't assume it's just actually it's a crisis line and it's there and we don't have to worry about it. Our experience of working with our partners in the AP has been they truly want to work with you in partnership to help you deliver wellbeing in your organisation, and they're almost falling over themselves to provide you with support and resources to do that. So I really encourage to use your suppliers. The other learning. Sorry, Marianne.
I was just going to ask you, you know, if we've got global companies here, do they need to spend some time as well about defining what well-being means? You know, sort of coming up with something that does mean something to them.
Yeah, and absolutely, and I think keeping it quite simple as well. So we simply talk about well-being is bringing the best of someone to work. That's all. That's what it is. And if you can, and it's back to that place of saying you're not expecting everybody to be in the same place all of the time, but on every single day, no matter what's going on in your life, if we can do our bit to support you, just to help you bring that best of whatever best is for you that day, then we've kind of done our job. And I think so. I don't think it needs to be overthought. I think it's well, too many words. I think just something really, really simple, and to have a model. So the 4 pillars I mentioned earlier have really, really helped people to get their heads around what well-being is as well, and also make connections across the organisation. So what we now find is that collaboration piece, well-being doesn't sit on its own just now. We're very, very linked into our partners in sustainable banking, for example, kind of lead out on the volunteering and community aspects, because that's part of social well-being. We're very linked in with our policy owners, and so it does allow you to have a model that allows you to do that as well.
Thank you. So we've just got a couple of minutes now left, and for those companies that are a bit further along the journey, what are the one or two pieces of advice that you give to them to really get that embedded into their culture?
Yeah, so I think communication. Actually, if I look back at where we are, if you can use all the communication channels that are available, it will truly embed well-being across your organisation. So it's not simply the case of just putting out a message and kind of fingers crossed hoping it lands well. Actually, you really do need to spend a little bit of time of having that structure in place to help you do that, whether it's a champion network or a wellbeing committee or whatever it might be. So I think communication is one of them. The second piece of advice would be leadership, or the leaders. So I think to your point, what you said earlier, Marion, all the external research, and we all know this, the importance of having leaders really equipped to be able to deal with this is hugely important. And to give a little bit of anecdotal, we ran a mental health awareness session last week, which was run by one of our suppliers, who actually was our private medical cover supplier, who and it was a psychiatrist who actually ran the session, and it just the feedback to that session is very different to any training we've ever had before, because it was very raw and it was very real, landed exceptionally well. People just wanted to get back on and talk about it again. So I think using, making sure your leaders are upskilled and using your suppliers to help you do that as well.
Brilliant. Well, Fiona, thank you so much. I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time, but it's really been interesting speaking with you, and thank you so much for sharing all that you've been learning at NatWest. So thank you as well, everybody, for attending this webcast. We would ask you, please do take that time to fill out the short evaluation form, and again to remind you that the recording of this webcast will be available to download within the next 24 hours. We put up some information about a seminar that we're running on well-being, and please, you'll see that you are eligible for a discount. So again, Fiona, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really great having you with us. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye,
everyone. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.